kind of scale that John's working on, big organisational stuff, and I'll let him introduce himself in a second a bit more. But I just wanted to say, this is the feedback that he's got from the previous presentation, and brilliant. So, John.
Set up for failure now.
So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just whatever you want to do.
So just introduce myself while we're switching the video there. So, hi, I'm John, and I've been working with Agile for 10 years now. And as you can see by my hair, I've been working a bit longer in IT than that. So lots of daggers in my back, and you can tell from my accent that I'm Irish as well. I did a lot of work over here in London, and currently based in Amsterdam. And I've worked in a number of different verticals: energy, utilities, supply chain, telecoms, startups, insurance, and all that kind of stuff. My specialty is Agile at scale and Agile as a change. So actually kind of the two of them going together, but they're not necessarily the same thing, if that makes sense. But just to keep myself a bit sharp, I work with startups as well and medium-sized companies, to help them on their journey as well. And in fact, I've noticed that sometimes smaller companies have bigger challenges actually than the bigger ones, which I found quite surprising. So this is a slide that I show to a lot of clients. And when I have a first engagement with them, I kind of want to know how far they want to go. What do you want? Do you see this lean agile thing as just a toolbox of methods, or do you see it as something a bit deeper? Where are you actually? Are you kind of in the Jeff Patton world where he's talking about discovery of requirements before you even go into the agile build? He talks about storyboarding, building fake product, not even configuring screens, actually photoshopping things together. Why, go through 2 or 3 sprints of slow velocity to find out in sprint 4 or 5 that actually, it's not the right product. So he's kind of gone post-agile, talking about discovery, kind of using lean analytics, design thinking, lean startup, that kind of stuff, and I find that quite exciting as well. But a lot of people are still stuck in the, the in-flight stuff. They have a pipeline of work and they just need to get through it, and that's where most people are actually. And so usually what I'm trying to find out what is the problem that they have. Are they having issues with discovery? I find a lot of the time they are actually having issues with discovery, but they don't want to worry about that right now. They actually want to focus on the delivery engine right now. That's where they're having issues. Or maybe they've tried something. For example, they might have tried Scrum, but when we do a little bit of digging, they've actually done deliberately changed Scrum, where they have a project manager and people weren't under pressure to have additional skills and all that kind of thing. And surprisingly, even though I found that a bad idea at the start, in some situations, especially when leaders aren't returning, doing something like that with Scrum can be useful in certain situations, yeah. And so what I do is I go in and literally I play video. So I go through the lean startup, lean analytics, the usual Kneiberg videos and David Anderson and all that kind of stuff. And I leave the scaling till later. I know there's lots of more scaling options. Bernard Schiffer has a fantastic deck actually on Twitter where he looked at some scaling methods, quite a number of them. Usually what I look at first is, what are the challenges? Why do you want to be agile in the first place? What are you trying to solve? What kind of fit do you have as well? Do you have business engagement, all that kind of thing? So depending where you are, you might go in a particular direction. And that's all well and good, but lean agile is also a change, and I'll talk about that more a bit later on. So this is kind of where I start, and only yesterday I spent 3 hours with a team, bringing them through this. I was very open with them, gave them the upside and the downside of every method. I said none of them are perfect, they all leave you with problems in terms of predictability. But everything actually has problems with predictability, and we've got that bit of a myth, I guess. But I bring them through everything, and I let them score the methods for themselves. What do they think would fit them for their organization? But that's only the start. That's just kind of figuring out which methods might suit you, actually. And what typically happens then, when they pick the method, is they usually fake it. And I've noticed this quite a lot, actually. You'd notice it on the jobs market. You'll notice it by the roles. You'll also notice by the rates that coaches and scrum masters get paid versus project managers and program managers, so you can kind of see the food chain there and where that's all going. And you know, I see this as an issue, and I was actually wondering, you know, what's the reason for this? And actually, I was in a large oil company as their enterprise agile coach, and in 2012, I thought it was a good idea to say it depends as the answer, because it depends on the context, and you know, I need to understand your context and all that kind of stuff. But I lose 2/3 of the audience by doing that. They have stage gates, they're there, they need to understand how they translate into this world. They don't relate, but you need to provide some kind of taxonomy, if you like, some kind of translation for them so that they can kind of go conversion from English to French or whatever, you know, waterfall to agile kind of thing. And what I discovered actually was that people were still referring to a thing called Stage Gate Zero, which didn't exist in our company anymore. And rules, once they stick, even if you delete the rules, you never get rid of them unless you replace them with new ones. And there were some experiments. A chap called Leandro Herrero, he's from the Chalfont project. I'll be talking about some of his work later on this evening. He refers to some studies in Stanford and various other places where, you know, people did a game on each other. So, for example, let's say you were asking me questions, and I was behind some glass, and there was electrodes tied onto me, and if I answered wrongly, you know, they would the person on the other side would press the button to give me a shock. Now, actually, the person on the other side of the glass wasn't receiving any shock, but they were putting on an act that they were receiving a shock. And what they discovered was that people would even do that to their friends. 2/3 of people would even do that to their friends. And if you even just look back in history, and you can kind of see a lot of things that come from people just following whatever the rules are. Okay, so that's there. That's part of us, and we do imitate each other, whether we realize it or not. We are influenced by our peers, and there's all sorts of examples for that. You know, just even looking at Facebook and likes and all that kind of stuff, you get the feel for that. Okay, so what tricks are we missing then? So I'll talk more about it later on, but I won't say none of them, but most of the scaling models don't really deal with Agile as a change. They say, you know, you do your big room planning, you know, these are the roles, this is how you kind of stack it up. This is how you get it all merging together, you know, and you got your feature teams, and you got this, and you got that, and blah, 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 and your dependency boards, and all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't deal with stuff like culture and, you know, hearts and minds, the organization design itself, the mindset and the habits. And I'm going to do a bit of digging into that. And actually, we're all going to do an exercise in this session to try and practice that. So it'll get more interactive as the session goes on. So how do we break habits? I was talking to another chap, and he's really into psychology, and actually, I didn't realize actually that, you know, in terms of habits, you know, our belief systems are kind of part of that as well, but that's kind of a tricky thing to change, right? So that's almost like religion, do you know what I mean? How do you deal with that? So kind of leave that alone. So about behaviours though, can we do something about behaviours? And again, you know, trying to give up cigarettes or whatever, you know, that's a behaviour. You know, how do you actually deal with that? So we're going to actually do a little bit of that this evening, and we're going to use these scenarios to actually break these down. We're actually going to use some particular problem types to actually deal with that. Okay, so Agile is a change, and you've got a few photographs up here. This is from another session, just going to touch on it. So Professor John Coleman, he's ex-Harvard, and I think he's in the top 1% of Amazon book sales. He's doing really well for himself. His current topic is how do you get, you know, once you get a startup, you know, when the startup becomes a big company, how do they keep kind of producing those big ideas, and how do they stop the bureaucracy from killing their, you know, disruptiveness in the market? But he has a book, Our Iceberg is Melting, Leading Change, all sorts of books, and as such as 8 steps, you know, create a sense of urgency, get a powerful guiding coalition, create the vision, empower the people, communicate, and off they go, but you lose momentum after the first few months. That's the problem. It's a real push model. It's a good start, but this chap over here, Peter Senga, a strategic thinker of the 20th century, talks about systems thinking, all that kind of stuff. He says change cannot be led, it must evolve. And so I was wondering for quite a while, okay, how do I get the two of them to work together? So change will be led, but it must be evolved. And what I realized later on was, depending on where you are on the timeline, actually, you could actually merge the two of those together. This is Bratton from, he was ex-NYPD, he's now back in forensics in NYPD. There was a problem in New York back in the early 90s with crime in the streets. I remember being chased off Times Square myself for my wallet. I've been back in New York several times since. I never had any problems since. And he did some very simple things. He did like, he picked the kingpins, so he got his commissioners, the precinct commissioners, to actually use the subway themselves. And they realized the problems that there were in the subway. They were kind of using their own cars or whatever. So that was a sense of urgency. But then what he did was he was very clever in terms of that. He spotted that there was like 7 stations and 2 lines that had most of the crime. And what you notice now, maybe in a lot of the stations here as well, in London and actually in other UK cities, there's a huge police presence at the underground stations, and you just get overwhelmed by the presence, and they just kind of move around just to make you remember, that you shouldn't really be engaging in crime. So he was a bit of a hero with that, and actually he's in the top 10 reads with the Harvard Business Review. But this chap over here we're going to talk about, Leandro Herrero and Viral Change. Okay, so in terms, what trick are we missing then? So I talked about Cotter, good start. You got a lot of momentum up front, but and he does have some advice. If you have naysayers, get them out of the tent as quickly as you can. Don't waste time trying to convince them, because you could be spending time on the people who actually will go on the journey with you. They won't turn anyway. You could argue about that, but he's got a lot of experience with change. And then you have, the various scaling models. I talked about that earlier. Mike Cohn does touch on change, but really most of the rest of them don't deal with that. So that's why I tried to separate scaling from the change itself. And if we then move on to the actual scaling models themselves, there's all sorts of ones there. Simon was talking about it earlier, the LESS model, Cotter even has a model and so on. I'm not going to go into that today, but they're very, very light. You can see Mike Cohn just touches on it there with the adapt mnemonic, but that's kind of as far as it goes, yeah? So, that doesn't really help you. So, and, Senga, he says, let change evolve. From an agile point of view, what does that mean in practice? It probably means, let's run experiments. The Lean Startup was probably ideal for that, in terms of running change experiments one after the other, and also Lean Kanban development. And I thought for a while, actually, that was, all you needed to do. This was the model that I had back in 2012. And I actually designed some changes on this. So a lot of collar style, all the 8 steps, all that kind of stuff, and then kind of running change experiments one after the other. And I gave people a choice of, which method they wanted to use. And you can see there some of the Senga stuff starts small, all that kind of stuff. All sorts of other theory going in there as well. And I want to ask you guys and gals, what do you think was the problem with this? What's missing with this? Where it even starts? Yeah.
People won't know what to do. Their existing job just do their role.
Yeah.
That's a huge shock.
Yeah, that's true. Any other suggestions?
Do you have the end in mind?
Yeah. The biggest problem that I had was I couldn't get this powerful guiding coalition. I had a few people who said they supported it, but really they were all looking at each other in the meeting room about whether they can actually really do this. That they also imitate. They need to see social proof from other people. In other words, they need to see that somebody else has actually succeeded. So in a sense, you almost need to have pilots running that have done really well before you're going to get any powerful guiding coalition to kind of go behind you and kind of force that going forward.
We used exactly that. They were at Credit Suisse to do a change program. So contribution stuff was the purpose of start.
Yeah.
So by finding contribution, we already had
Yeah.
a special interest group.
Exactly. But there's still a problem though, right? It's very push, isn't it? We're pushing the change out, we're all now going to be lean agile, isn't the world wonderful, and we're all going to kind of convert things. And what I learned as well in a large oil company is that pull is a better model than push. You can do a little bit of both, but I found that the teams, the programs, the lines of business who actually asked for our help were far more likely to succeed than when we were actually pushing something in there, because we might actually be pushing something slightly different. For example, we used a deliberately changed Scrum with project managers, which worked quite well in 2 lines of business. And if we tried to push Scrum and technical excellence in there, we wouldn't have been pushing an open door. So it was better if they pulled that. And so that's why I'd like to introduce this new model, which is it's out since 2011, I guess, from Leandro Herrero, a very charismatic person. He spoke at a TED Talk in London, I think, and he's got all sorts of ideas, and he calls himself an organization architect. He's a former MD, psychologist, all that kind of thing, but he's also been an exec as well in some very large companies. And you can see here on the left, you've got the Kotter style, big splash, changing comms, here's our behaviours, and actually some of the behaviours don't mean anything. I mean, I was in one company where they told us to be bold and confident. What the hell does that mean? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to? Yeah, I didn't get that. So, behaviors influencing, and you can see there social networks, and I'm not talking about Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about people actually meeting each other, using the grapevine in your company, lighting little fires to try and get some success. Yeah. And here are some of the sample quotes from that. Okay. Okay, so what I want to show you now is viral change itself. So how does this thing work? That's a bit big. Okay, so here's the roadmap. We're kind of going up a hill here. How does this all work? I'm going to make it really simple. Actually, we're going to do this in practice ourselves. So it'll only be a few minutes here. So the first thing you need to do with viral change, you can see it's trademarked. You have to get a license from one of Leandro Herrera's companies, like the Chalfont project. You can't roll out viral change in your company without licensing the method from them. So be aware of that. But it does have a lot of merit. So you ask key influencers for help is the first thing. So those influencers, we often think that this is the formal network, but actually it's the informal network as well. So who are the likely people for others to imitate? So there might be some lead developer, if he or she says something, people kind of turn, they really pay attention. They might be kind of a few levels down the organization, but they really, really respect it. And so you're looking for those, you're kind of doing a stakeholder map at the start, and you're kind of pulling together the people who could support this. And the next thing you need to do then is figure out what your non-negotiable behaviours are. Now, I'll be honest with you, I haven't figured out yet what the consequences would be or how you could design a consequential situation if you don't follow those non-negotiable behaviours. But the idea is, if you have, say, 50 behaviours for Lean Agile, I think I came up with 100 and something earlier. What you need to do, if you want this really to go viral, you need to get down to less than 5, ideally down to 3. And just nail those 3. And actually there's a lot of value in this. The slide I showed you earlier, how far do you want to go? It's a very important question. Which direction do you want to go? Because we might actually discover when we get these influencers together that what I think Agile is very different to actually what they want. And so you're achieving a benefit in that you're actually agreeing what the change is going to be. Does that make sense? So we're actually going to do a little bit of that. And once you've done that, you write some stories. I don't mean user stories. I mean normal stories, memorable stories that people will remember. Use the grapevine. We're going to create some informal networks in our company as well, formalized informality. So you kind of set it up, but then you kind of let people just get on with it. And these people will then provide the social proof, and they'll kind of imitate. So you kind of live and breathe by those behaviours. And backstage leadership, standing back, servant leadership, all that kind of stuff, just giving them whatever they need to get done, kind of like a Scrum Master role in a sense, isn't it? But from a leadership point of view. And that's essentially how it works. I talked about rules earlier. I don't think it's enough to just go with 3 or 5 behaviours or whatever that is. I think you do need to set rules as well. So what I learned, particularly in a very large organisation, and it went against the grain for me, if I'm honest. Scrum is a framework, Kanban is blah, 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 da, 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 all these methods and so on and so forth. If you want people to do it consistently across the organisation, you need to give them a map. And that's what I learned the hard way. So you need those as well. Now, I'm not talking about prescriptive, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but, giving people the lessons for year 1 using a teaching analogy. A guy I used to work with, he went to teaching college, and when he left college, his lecturer gave him the lesson plans for the first year, because he wasn't an expert right now teaching, and maybe at the end of year 1 he could do his own notes, but at least he has notes for the first year. So something like that, so that when people are starting with Lean Agile, that they can kind of move along with that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the practical bit. Could be a car crash, who knows? So one thing that I did before when I was talking at Simon's thing the last time, I'm just going to flick through it because I'm not going to go by dogma here. Because if you've got Agile as a change, and whether it's Scrum or Kanban or Lean Startup, whatever, who cares? You might have your own method, yeah? You're dealing with this as a change, and I put my own effort at it. I'm not going to bore you with all of these. These will all be up on the meetup site. But I came up with behaviours for example, for Waterfall, for Scrum with Technical Excellence, for Lean Kanban. These are just my versions. I'm sure there's more. Lean Startup and all these kind of things. And that's all great. And that screwed up Scrum, by the way, deliberately screwed up, as opposed to completely faked and pretending you're doing it. And the do whatever method and so on. I'm kind of tongue in cheek there. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that. What I'm actually going to focus on are these behaviours. I have a Kanban board here. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with David Spann. He's from the Qatar Consortium. And he's done a lot of work on agile managers. Do you know the way we talk about pigs and chickens, or we used to talk about pigs and chickens? That's very alienating for middle management. The change is top down, it's bottom up. But you got a lot of people in the middle that need to interact with these teams and give them support. And David Spann did a lot of work on that. So I extracted some of the behaviours from him, but some were just my own ideas. And I'm just kind of giving you some food for thought. Because what you're going to be doing today, I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios. And, I don't know how many behaviours I have there. I think if I just squash it down, I've got 62 Lean Agile behaviours, 16 not so Agile, and then I've got some other ones. And we need to kind of select our top 30 and then kind of go into the top 10, top 5, really narrow it down what's our number 1. And I want you to try and apply this in practice and then come up with a story to actually support that. And just checking our time. How are we doing for time? Okay, I think we're doing okay for time. So the behaviours that I have here are just ones that I've come up with. And David Spann has come up with, and I've kind of hoovered it from, I've been thinking about this for a long time. These could be completely wrong. But you can kind of see, because I remember I did a behaviours exercise at a previous meetup, a different meetup group, and they struggled with the behaviour thing. They were coming up with one word. And what I mean is something that you actually do. If someone said this to you, you'd understand what it is. So, unfixing scope, for example, is a fairly obvious one for me. But often when I actually go in and actually negotiate the behaviours, I find actually they want fixed everything, and they actually want different types of Agile. So I might be very uncomfortable with that, but if I want this influencer group to actually buy into the virality of this change, they're going to decide which behaviours are actually going to go viral. Does that make sense? So you can see, hopefully you can read these. You all have Post-its on your table, hopefully. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show a slide. I'm going to give you two scenarios. Just bear with me. And these are real life situations that I had myself. This is not the current state, this is the way they were. So I went into a water scrum fall situation. Does everybody know what water scrum fall is? Okay, so some people use that as their step towards agility. Some people get stuck there and don't go beyond it. But they were actually releasing on a monthly basis. So a lot of people doing water scrum fall actually, have a long lead time for getting a release, yeah. But they were actually managing to do this. They didn't know what would be in the release, and they had varying levels of agility between the teams. I mean, there was 50 teams. I think went higher than that actually. So that's one scenario. That's the current scenario. And so, what we need to talk about is, where do we want them to be? Because in that situation, that's one program, and they're moving to 16 programs. So when you have water scrum fall in one program, you might manage with your heroes. Your heroes might be stretched when you go to 16 programs. So I want you to think about how you'd actually deal with that. What kind of behaviours you're going to decide, what change needs to be. I'm not going to prescribe to you. You might say this is actually perfectly fine and that's where we should stay. But it'd be interesting to get a readout from each table on, where does that scenario, that's the current scenario. What's the B, if you like? What's the point B, the end point of that? And the second situation is a bit different. A company I worked with as well, they actually won a top award. They managed to fix their pipeline problem, as in the in-flight stuff is flowing. They struggled with the Kanban system. They thought initially they couldn't use Scrum because they couldn't wait a few weeks or whatever to change scope and things like that. And just the discipline of even updating the Kanban board, they weren't even doing that. So they actually ended up using Scrum eventually. But they had a problem here in that, okay, they've got a cash cow right now, but how do they stay ahead of the market? How do they stop their competition from catching up with them? They had a leading edge, if you like, on their competition. They were really different. And the challenge that they had was, they were becoming a kind of a Me Too. And, that's a bit of a danger in itself. So there's two scenarios. I guess what we should do, what I'm thinking here is, if we can actually use the tables here, okay? And on the tables you've got post-its and you've got markers. You're actually going to write your own behaviors, okay? And in each, what you're going to do is you're actually going to define, for the water scrum falls scenario, you're going to define what the behaviors should be for that change, if you think there should be a change. And then we're going to move on to the second scenario. So what I want you to do is, people are at the front tables here, move to the back to pick a table at the back, and on each table you will take water scrum fall first. We'll call time, I'll check the time in a minute, and then we'll move on to the front tables and we'll deal with the second scenario, and we'll try to design the change, and then we'll come up with stories to support those as well. What I'm really interested in is the playback from you. So, you'll come up with different answers. So just looking at the time now, it's 25 past the hour, according to my watch. If you could spend... Yeah?
You're asking us, what would we do if we walked into these scenarios?
Yeah.
Specifically, things that we would do, behaviours we would show.
Yeah, so you're purely using a behavioural hat. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you would do. But this particular exercise is about behaviours. Which behaviours would you select as your top 5? And that will actually help you to design the change, if there is a change, for the table that you're at. Okay? So I guess the people here, if you wouldn't mind moving to the back table there. Same here, move to the back table there. Same over here. There should be plenty of post-its and markers on the tables. The first thing you should do is just write down behaviours and just put them down on the table, and then start shuffling them, and you should, stack them and rank them on your table. Does that make sense? Anyone got any questions?
How long have you got?
10 minutes?
Okay.
Okay. So maybe I need to behave more forcefully. Okay. So we're going to do a playback from each table. So we're kind of going to discover actually, what you think, is the current situation fine? Do you need to tune it a tiny bit, or do you need to do some kind of major change? And hopefully what you discovered while you were doing this is you kind of shaped what the change might be, yeah? And maybe you surprised yourselves as well in terms of, where everybody's going with this. So could we have a volunteer from this table, please, to stand up and explain to everybody else what the behaviours were for the Water Scrum Falls scenario, please?
Owners to prioritise the backlog. So we can't assume there's one product owner, there's multiple ones, but they also need to work together. So we've got defining the scope and prioritise. We've got defining the goals with scale and measure. So what's the current state overall? What's tolerable in each situation? So below that is intolerable. And what's the wishful state and showing progress against the goal? How we can do that going forward. And we said discuss options for going towards those goals as a group, create some sort of impact estimation table, because again that's at portfolio level.
Okay.
Work, so you can see what you're doing and discover the quick wins from that.
I'll give you my interpretation of what you just said, and you can just tell me whether I've just read it wrong. You're reasonably happy with the model. You think it needs to be tuned and tweaked to kind of deal with the portfolio level and the multiple programs under that, and you've identified specific tactics that you could kind of start with to help to improve that. Is that a fair summary?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Can we have a volunteer from this table, please?
I'm not sure there was a lot of consensus.
Okay.
But the top 5 we ended up with at the stage we stopped at least was that we should focus on less at programme and the sprint level. That maybe going from one programme to 6 was maybe a bit much, and also if teams don't know what they're going to release at the end of a month, maybe if they're focusing on less, they have more idea of what they're releasing.
So as opposed to less the scaling model, you mean doing less work? So not going to 16 programs, going to 5 programs, for example.
Just focus on less.
And just get them to maximize the flow through that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then looking at more sort of continuous release planning rather than all this big upfront set in stone change programs, but just looking at reducing the length of their planning cycles or the detail of their planning cycles to try and make that more change friendly.
Yeah.
And then we've also got sort of having a clear roadmap so everyone knows how they fit into a big picture.
Yeah.
They're getting cross-functional teams that represent the whole pipeline, so you haven't got like chunks of stuff all happening up front and then actually only having iterations around very specific bits of work, actually trying to get more over the pipeline.
Okay.
And then our 5th thing was improving feedback within the organisation, improve information radiators, helping people see what's happening and give them more control over things.
So the key question I have for you, because the impression I'm getting, but I might be wrong, is that you think that the current scaling model needs to be adapted, and SAFE is the model that you have in mind because it has this diagram or whatever. But I'm not sure whether that's where you were going. Okay. What were you thinking? What were you thinking of?
Just improved coordinated scrum.
Um,
Just better than a name for it. Just people talking to each other.
Okay. At a team level. Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's good. Yeah. So it's kind of like tuning the agile piece of the Water Scrum Fall. Get that humming.
More encompassing rather than having lots of waterfall and then some scrum.
Okay, so that means you would have to do some change to the model. You just haven't figured out quite yet what that would be. Okay.
So
Okay.
I think we looked at water scrum before as meaning a lot of upfront design,
Yeah.
then iteratively delivering,
Yeah.
and then perhaps a long release cycle at the end,
Yeah.
and trying to look at how we could break that down with more continuous planning, continuous releases, taking on less rather than a lot of stuff, trying to break it down into more iterative
Yeah.
deliverables.
Okay. Okay, I think he would have gone somewhere fairly deep if he kind of went on another 10 minutes. I think that's really good. And it's interesting, there's a difference in the tables already, isn't there? So you guys were talking about tuning what we have, some specific tactics, and slightly different approach as well, equally agile, but just a slightly different approach. And here you were talking about kind of getting the agile piece humming better, maybe more of a pull system, pulling stuff in as you kind of, as basically doing replenishment, if you like. That's what I understood from this table, which is a very different change to the first table. So that's very interesting. And do we have a person to play back from this table as well?
Darren. Yeah, at first we've broken it down to 3 themes.
Yeah.
We're going to observe the present state.
Yeah.
So we understand the problem. And that's some improvement.
We go all the granular, but we did what you asked.
Yeah.
We distilled it.
Yeah.
And then we moved on to some more orienting themes where we analyse the things and we prioritise using the. So we focus on different, on what our key values are and explaining the principles, and then move on to acting onto those things. Ideally, maybe not making massive changes depending on what we've observed and how we prioritise.
So what I'm hearing there is continuous improvement. Don't go running down the mountain. Walk in nice and slowly. See what's going on. Maybe run some Kaizen events or retros or whatever kind of tools, reflective thinking, and get an improvement to 10%, and then see what next 10% you can get. That's what I'm hearing from this table. Pardon? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, let's see what current state
Yeah.
is, analyse that,
Yeah.
and let's see what the appetite for further change is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's not one risk of massive failure,
Yeah.
because
Or interrupting the fact that, never quite sure what to release, but at least they're monthly releasing. And
Yeah.
monthly releasing's pretty hot.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can all be critical of what's going to fall, but if you're doing that, you're a legend, really, aren't you?
Obviously,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
definitely doing Scrum or some form of Agile towards
Yeah.
the end of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, that'd be the drive.
Yeah.
However, the version of it will have environmental issues and people issues, so
Yeah.
it will be something that fits the people.
Okay, thank you for that. And we're now going to move on to the second scenario. So I don't mind if you want to use the same table, that's fine. I don't really mind. So I'll just explain the second scenario. We're going to take 10 minutes again. It's a startup, and I've worked with them myself, and a very good company. They do want to be lean and they want to be agile. So there was a debate in the company about whether they should be agile, whether they should be lean. Yeah. And what happens in a lot of companies is the development and testing piece gets labelled as agile, and that's an agile thing, and off you go, and the business engagement is kind of difficult to happen or whatever. But what we did is we tried to lean up the whole value stream. We looked at the overall process that they had, and how can we reduce the cycle time, and how can we maximize the flow through their system. And we started with Kanban, but they weren't even updating the board. And then they said they didn't need to meet every day, and I walked through the floor and there was no buzz, and there was all sorts of smells there. And I felt that Scrum was the answer, and I showed them Craig Larman video on his website, and they loved that, and they set up feature teams straight away. They still left one component team and so on, but they struggled with that as well. But eventually they got there, and their challenge is the last bullet, actually. So you can see they're doing quite well as a company. Their pipeline is working. But it's sometimes you come up with a fantastic product and it doesn't matter. You can incubate forever, and you might never have another product that's like that. Actually, it might only be one. But
2% of venture capital projects in the Agile arena
yeah,
in the States don't get further cash.
yeah,
It's this problem.
yeah. But there is a method that helps you to improve the chances of success. So the question is whether you want to try it down here. I don't know. I've just given you a hint, yeah? So you might say it's fine the way it is. But you might also say, well, we need to do some change. And I want you to do exactly the same exercise. Write down some behaviours. After you do this playback, I then want you to make up some stories to support those. But let's do one thing at a time. Let's just do the behaviours. Try to get the top 5.
So these are the behaviours that will get them to get to a new product?
Well, okay. Each table needs to decide themselves what the problem is. I'm saying this is the situation. I'm not saying that this is I'm not saying that this is a problem. We all have different views. In fact, each table might say this is perfect. Or you might say, no, there's something we need to change here. And you'll identify some behaviours that will shape that change. If you decide it's okay, that's fine. You don't need to write any behaviours. Okay, time's up, everybody. So just give you 15 seconds to just finish it up. You need a speaker from each table, so we're going to start with this table. Yeah. Okay, can I have... Pardon? Yeah. Okay, we've got a playback from the middle table now. Thank you.
Right, so the behavior that we selected is about prototyping, failing fast, doing a lot of experiments, and being confident with the real user. That's what the goals. What is the feature? Contract, okay. So the other behavior is about not having fixed feature contract, but engaging with the customers on going agile and behaviors. Then we got trained Scrum Masters and product owners. So we figured there might be a lack of expertise on Scrum and running process.
Okay.
Adopt robust tooling and processes and rules, make collectively improving the rules around the process and making it a bit more organized, bring structure to it. And then share the results, information on the data, put the information out there and making sure that product owners and customers can see and everyone is on the same page.
Okay, I think I heard 2 messages there. Tell me if I'm wrong. So the first thing I heard is discipline, structure, get organized. The second thing I heard, because you talked about experiments and you talked about getting out and talking to customers, and I didn't know if you were talking about the lean startup or if you were just talking about, just getting your product owners to get out and talk to customers.
Actually bringing customers in.
Okay.
And putting things in their hands and letting the whole team, if they're not maybe trusting the product owners to start with, maybe actually them seeing the product in people's hands,
Yeah.
and everyone feeling ownership of that relationship will
Yeah.
help improve that.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, this table here, please.
We really picked up on the lack of discipline. It felt like going off in trying lots of different systems. So we really wanted to pick up on getting a more rigid discipline and putting some systems in place to help support how to get the pipeline working again. We wanted to find what the customer needed and create feedback loops. We felt again with the lack of trust that we needed to somehow in the systems create a way of connecting the developers with the customers and allowing failure, because we felt that maybe we wanted to create a more experimental environment with features, not with systems.
Yeah, okay.
We also wanted to concentrate on getting delivery started so that actually value was being created,
Yeah.
which would help with the ultimate problem of the fact that they're closing them down by not giving them cash. So we want to get at least as good as the first one, be delivering on a cadence of some description, which obviously we proved. So we felt that everything clashes against each other. That's why we mentioned discipline. So everything is like they're trying everything all at once
Yeah.
and getting nothing done.
Yeah.
That's what we mean by discipline. We're not on about sort of beating people with a stick or knocking them into shape. We're on about, let's choose something, let's go down that one. Which one do you want? Sprinting or scrolls or Kanban? We don't care. Do what you want, but choose one and stick with it.
Yeah.
And then generally they seem to have the roles. It's good enough for now. Doesn't look perfect, but it's good enough for now. So leave that alone. Just about managing to stick to the sprint scope. Bring some discipline to that, and that links with the requirements thing. Build trust, build relationships, but focus very, very. We've ignored the won the top award deliberately. Who cares about awards?
Well,
Delivery is what counts.
you say that,
Okay.
but if we won a top award, why don't the developers trust the product owners?
Yeah, exactly. What award did they win?
That's a good question. Where did it come from?
It can be based on sales, you see, but sales are fine based on the products you have now. But if your competitors are catching up with you, and next year, and actually for me, I'm a bit cynical. If I have a startup and it wins an award this year, I'm probably going bust next year.
Yeah.
That's the way I'm thinking. So how do we deal with the risk of the last line? I think you hit the nail on the head there, both tables so far, in terms of discipline and cadence, and getting the customer in, talking directly to the team, so we kind of build that trust. Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, so in this team, the first thing that we wanted to address was the team, simply a split between the team and the lack of trust. And the first thing we wanted to do was invite everybody to a workshop with some questions in mind. So we want them to, the team to create and agree ways of working. So what's working well at the moment they'd like to keep? What things are affecting them? What things they want to work on, what's working well, what's not working, what might affect us in the future. This whole thing about with the PO and customer, we've got a few things to say. Well, identify someone who'd like to do the Agile type BA role, but also invite devs and whoever wants to attend meetings with the customer. It's not an issue. Why don't they see what's actually happening and what sort of information we're getting back, and what interesting questions might they want to ask that they think are missing. What's going on in the competitor landscape? Is there a gap between what we're doing well, that whole thing about strengths and weaknesses and things we might be missing, opportunities? What do we want to do to address that? Go back to, we've won an award, and we've decided it's an industry-leading award, we've done really well.
Yeah.
We're like examples, but how did we get here? What was working well and what seems to be shifting? What's changing? Was it the product? Was it people? What is it that worked well? How did we get that great idea, and what was the momentum behind it? And the whole thing about process, again, how do we want to work together? But with the example of Kanban, what stops them from using the Kanban board? So what is it that they're resisting? Because it's something that they don't like and isn't working for them. So what would work? What would be better? So just trying to get that initial piece underway, and then sharing, inviting people to meetings, making sure that UX is involved, but looking at the overall strengths and opportunities.
Okay.
Trying to get more of a team feeling rather than there seems to be divisions. So there seems to be this way, like there are certain stars, and some people they don't feel are pulling their weight, but actually show that isn't the case.
Okay, thank you very much. So you're all right, actually. In this situation, what we did was we got the customers and the developers and testers and product owners all in the same calls. So that kind of helped to improve the trust in terms of the requirements being fed back. The discipline as well, we wrote job specs for the team members. And we also wrote, we did a process flow as well for release management and code merging and branching and things like that. They were quite good with continuous integration and all that kind of stuff, but there was a lack of discipline in terms of when you put something back into the trunk and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, we did all of that, and we actually used retrospectives to help them to get to that place where they understood that. Where they're still challenged is they have the pipeline flowing, but they don't, they're not getting to the next disruptive idea that's going to keep them generating lots of cash. And I'm not sure if they're ready yet to kind of think about that. They're so consumed, sales, revenue, profits, you know, keep the engine going. But somebody needs to have a long-term view as well, and at least be investigating the next product. And I would have hoped that would have been the lean startup for them. Going out, get out of the office, talk to customers, show some Photoshop stuff all hanging together, you know, run some pivots and persevere if it's something good. And, you know, eventually you might find a product that the customer actually wants, and then that might be your next cash cow. But they're not ready for that yet. On the first scenario, where they're at the moment is that they're quite happy with their water scrum fall model. They would like to get more consistency through their team, so you know that there's a cadence that, you know, they do the grooming so many weeks ahead, and that they've got good planning and the good dependencies and stubbing and all that. So get that kind of humming well, and they've agreed to look at that again and see whether the scaling model is still okay. I have a concern that the scaling model won't work. That, you know, if they do ramp, I would love to say keep it at 5. But that's not within my kind of influence. So it's possible that we might need a different scaling model if we go beyond that. We might actually need a pull system. And I'm not saying which ones it would be, but there's loads of scaling models there. The Spotify is perfect world, you know, Less is beautiful world as well, lovely mathematical model. Being honest, you know, the least worst scaling model that isn't water scrum fall, what do you think it is? Any guesses? Doing nothing?
Difficult to scale.
Scaled Agile framework is the one I have in mind. It's not perfect, but you know what? It's people understand where they fit in. There's a diagram, and everybody kind of clicks into it. Okay, so we have another exercise now. How are we doing for time? What time is it now? Okay, so we've got 10 minutes left. So what I want you to do now on each table, let's pick the last scenario, which was the startup. Pick the top behavior and write a story about that behavior. Now, I don't mean a heroic story, something that would be memorable. So, I don't know, for example, I'll tell a story, and it's probably a crap story. I was in court today. It was just a civil case, but it was kind of entertaining. I went in, was waiting for the judge to come in. All these barristers around the place with their, you know, their fancy collars and the black cloaks and all that kind of thing, and the solicitors kind of interacting with the clients and so on and so forth. And I noticed how the barristers were really friendly with each other and sharing photographs with each other and all that, kind of really, really friendly, and kind of reminded me of a change agent when you're doing Agile, that, you know, there's a kind of a tightrope that you need to walk on where, you know, a barrister is trying to fight for their client, but they need to work with that barrister again for a different client tomorrow. And us as change agents as well, you know, we can push a company so far, but actually there needs to be pull as well. And if you push too hard, you won't get your contract renewed or whatever. So there's a tension there. You want to still be there so you can kind of help them to continuously improve. I noticed that with the barristers. And the other thing I noticed, that there was a bit of a food chain of barristers there as well. They say, you know, good lawyers know the law, and great lawyers know the judge. And some barristers, senior counsels, whatever, just do a nod and a smile, and the judge would say, yeah, you're on straight away. But the interesting thing about today was there were 7 judges sick today in Munster, the part of Ireland that I live in. And that meant that the guy who was doing criminal law came up into our courtroom. Yeah, and he was doing a civil case. And so I thought that's kind of good, because, you know, I'm going to look like a fantastic guy next to a criminal, right? So, but, you know, he had a set time for the day. So obviously he was trying to do 2 courtrooms at the same time. And he effectively did a replenishment meeting 3 times in the day. I noticed it the last time I went there as well. So 10:30 we go in, they do the call list. Who's on today? Okay, so you're on, you consenting with each other, so that'll be quick, that's fine. You're 2 minutes. Oh, that's contested over there, that's a trial, it's for 2 hours. Okay, push that back, or we might adjourn that, and so on. And they basically did weighted shortest job first. So they tried to, you know, get through a lot of cases You know, they did not get big cases to kind of clog up the whole system. At the same time, there were some cases that really needed to be dealt with immediately, even though they were big. And so they did that at like 10:30, and then did it again at 2:00, and then again at 3:30, and so it was effectively like a Kanban pull system, wasn't it? It was like a replenishment meeting, you know, 3 times, and it worked really well actually. And so they were prioritizing, you know, and so that's a story, right? And another story is, pardon?
Did you get let off?
I did. It was adjourned. Yeah. I can thank you guys because I had to fly over here. Sorry, Your Honour, I have to fly to London today. Anyway, yeah. The other story is, I'm not sure if you're into philosophy, but there's a guy. He's kind of controversial. His name is Osho. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. Kind of an Indian guy. He went to America. Yeah. He says some rubbish, in my opinion, but he also says some really valuable things, yeah? And one of the things kind of struck me about what he said was, if you're really strong, you know, like a tree, when there's a storm, you know, your branches will break, or you could get torn out of the ground. And if you're strong against the environment, you will actually break. But if you're flexible, and you can go with the wind like a blade of grass, you'll still be around. You might still get trodden on, but the blade of grass will still come back up again. And so I also think that of that as a metaphor for change agents as well when we're doing Agile as a change. We need to be really careful that we're not digging in too hard in terms of, you know, these are the Agile principles and the values and blah, blah, blah. Don't get me wrong. I was a purist and pragmatist and kind of open again, and still try to stick to the good principles, but you have to be careful when you think that Agile is also a change, which involves people, and if you're too hard, you'll be the tree that will get ripped out of the ground and your contract won't get renewed in 6 months' time. So there are 2 stories, simple stories. I don't know if they're memorable or not, but if you can come... You caught me there. So if you can come pick your top behavior and write a story together. Okay, so you've got 5 minutes, and you're going to play back the story. Okay, so we'll start with this table. Okay, we're going to start with the playback on this table in the middle. Okay.
Okay. Our behavior was that we wanted to make people get constant contact with real users and do very fast experiments and get prototypes into user hands. And the story is that once upon a time there was a company, they tried to develop a screen to ask people for permission to share usage statistics with the company, and everyone on board had like ideas. Developers had some ideas, CEO had some ideas, designers had some ideas, so they decided to let everyone design a screen.
Yeah.
And they decided to show those screens to a set of users. So it's like A/B testing, but ABCD A/B testing. But there was one guy who decided to do it differently. He took the screen he designed, went to people, asked what they understand, would they agree or not, and iterated a couple of times, showing it to different people. It's like a whole testing he did. And actually they delivered all the screens, showed them to users, and they ended up with statistics like everyone else had the same percentage of users agreeing to the screen, plus minus 5%. But the guy actually achieved 80%, and 15% of people were postponing the decision. It's like asking later, because I don't have time at the moment. So they said, yeah, you are great, you will be designing the screens in the future. You are the best guy. And he said, no, that's not me. That's how we should work with people. That's how I work with them. It's not about me, it's about the way we work. And they changed to the way of working.
What's the moral of the story?
You shouldn't rely on your gut feel, best guess, or something like that. You should go to people and work with them.
Thank you very much. Okay, this table?
Well,
So our thing was about improving collaboration in the team. So I was remembering the other day I was standing waiting for a train. And it was very long, we had modern trains, loads of carriages. And the guys were signalling each other from each end as to when the train was ready to depart. And sometimes I've seen them use hands, and sometimes I've seen them use lights, and sometimes they might be waving a flag or yelling something you can't quite hear. And what it reminded me is that what's essential about collaboration is that people can speak a common language. They come together at some point and have enough of a shared understanding that even when they're working at a distance and maybe they can't sit next to each other, they can't hear each other directly, they don't see each other day to day. If they have that shared understanding because they have come together in the past and learned about how to talk to each other and how to collaborate, then the system can work and the work can proceed. So that sort of said to me that was the core of collaboration, was having enough of that shared understanding in the first place. Like the signals of the train.
Great, thank you very much. So the moral of the story is attaining a common understanding at all levels, actually. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Okay. Story from this team?
So we picked the discipline or cadence management in this case. So I often buy food from the market. When I was growing up and going to the market, you'd be able to pick your own vegetables and fruit. The seller at the store would take the veg and put it on the scales and weigh it up for you and give you a price. Now when you go to the markets, I've noticed that they always put everything in those plastic bowls. And it's often like a bowl for £1 or a bowl for £1.50. So this means much faster queues when you come up there. Instead of having each person getting to select exactly what they want, they just get one size fits all. So there's problems with this. So you don't get to pick exactly what you want. But the benefits are really clear for everyone. Much faster throughput. You don't get left with all the bad apples at the end. You just get that one thing. Just a nice way of having the system in place.
So is the moral of the story, keep it simple, less variations in your product? Standard job size.
And agreeing on a system.
Okay, cool.
Agree on a system, manage your practice, work with flow.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. The purpose of this session was to help you to understand viral change. There's other parts to viral change which we haven't done in the exercise today, setting up the formalized informal network. This is kind of like a formalized informal network. You know, Simon set it up, but as such, you know, you all kind of did what you needed to do, and there was kind of self-management and that kind of thing. And it's all about pull. So you kind of light enough fires, as Leandro Herrera would say. I don't like the metaphor, but it's memorable. So you light lots of fires in the mountain. You don't know which one's going to take off, but if you have a kind of a pull system where you use these top 5 behaviours and you try to get pull from those, it will eventually take off. And that's much more desirable than trying to push something hard and actually just losing momentum completely and maybe faking everything. The other benefit of viral change is we achieve a common understanding of what the change is. Because you have to think about the behaviours. I mean, we can all say, where we want to be, blah, 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 but we could all have different views of that. But because you collaborated on what the behaviours were, you achieved a common understanding of that.
That's not a Sengai thing. You mentioned Sengai earlier. Obviously, his most famous book is The Fifth Discipline, but one of the 5 disciplines is having that shared vision.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the irony is that also them two things, no doubt, the first one will have been pushed,
Yeah,
and the bottom one will be pulled, and you can end up in a situation where pushing will give you a minimal success,
yeah,
and then you wait for pull, whereas which possibly what the top one has opportunity for,
yeah,
whereas the bottom one has no opportunity because you've gone for pull at the beginning and no
Yeah.
one's pulling, and they don't want to hear push.
yeah. And there's 3 schools of thought with change. 2 of them are based on top-down support for the change. So Cotter, Powerful Guiding Coalition, yeah. And even with Herrero, you had to get the key influencers, who could be people in the formal organisation and the informal organisation, getting together. So that's kind of like top-down as well. Senga is the only one where you can kind of do it from the bottom up as well. The reality is you need both. So actually the model I've come up with now, it's still a theory, and I have been applying it, and I can't say I have enough success stories yet, or I haven't got to the end of the chain to say whether it's true or not. But I think it's a bit of cotter at the start. You run your experiments as you go along. You kind of have your transformation backlog. You run your experiments off that, and you're using the viral change piece to get the behaviours right. Because the biggest problem that I see with Agile as a change is the amount of faking that goes on. So even with deliberately changed Scrum, for example, where you have like only 4 rules left in Scrum that you're complying with, I even saw people faking that because they were using Agile to bypass process, actually. They were being cynical. They weren't actually trying to deliver quickly, manage risk early. They were actually trying to avoid the stage gate system that they had, and so they saw this as an avenue for bypassing process. So that's what I noticed as well. So, and so when you tap into the behaviours piece, even if they do deliberately change Scrum, if you have your top 5 behaviours, you can kind of nail them on the behaviours if they're not complying with them. Yeah. So that's the bit I haven't thought about. The consequences. What do you do? So, carrot and stick. I don't know what the answer is there, if I'm honest. Surely there must be some consequences if you don't comply with those behaviours.
I think if you can make the behaviours transparent and the things that are not complying with those behaviours transparent, then peer pressure and the sort of as long as you've got to the point where you've got enough drive going forwards in the organisation and enough people supporting that, then when those impediments through behaviour, people not adopting the behaviours arises, hopefully they become transparent enough so that the general momentum forces those people in line in a way.
Also, I think to show it, to throw it to relief, if you like, if you start telling stories about where people have followed behaviours, especially in the face of adversity, if you tell proper stories about that, then it shows the people who are not following behaviours in a bad relief, if you like.
Exactly.
Shines a light.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing you can do is that ways of working is the team comes up with consequences, and the team has all signed up to, if you like, the carrot and the stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if any form of scaling is sitting on the form of the present forms we've got, like Scrum, Kanban, and such like, and how we want to scale them up, there are practices within that. So if the working agreement is about a group agreeing and using that as a tool instead of take the emotion out of conversation by saying we all agreed with something.
Exactly.
If you're utilising them methods, then it's to try and find a working agreement at that scaled level.
One other observation as well is we did touch on scaling models, but it wasn't a huge part of the conversation. So a lot of people think when you're implementing Agile as a change, we throw in the scaling model and everything's going to be fine. The scaling model is kind of besides the point. You only need scaling. If you want Agile as a change, you want lots of projects and product teams all doing little bits of lean and Agile around the organization. If they scale, fine. One of the first rules of scaling is don't scale. But if you have to, then you pick a model. But I think you noticed that during this conversation, we thought about maybe changing the scaling model, but it wasn't the main issue. Yeah.
So what we've got now is obviously carrying this conversation. There's some loads of good stuff going on. We've got some pizza, so everyone was hungry. I was expecting slightly more people, so we've got tons of pizza. Loads and loads of it. We've got, we'll take it home. So eat as much as we can, some drinks as well, and we can obviously carry on. I think we need to be out here at the absolute latest at 9. So let's eat some pizza and carry on this discussion over some food.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.